excited to be here with you guys because I've covered tech for CNN for years, and I feel like there are all these questions that even in media we don't ask, and we have to start asking them. I have so many places to start, but I wanted to start with kind of a basic question, which is kind of at the heart of this panel, and we can just go around and take a stab at it. But when we look, do you think in the current generation of technology, we're losing our sense of empathy? What do you think? Who wants it? How about you?
I will say absolutely, definitely, yes. We develop empathy as human beings through our relationships with other human beings, because when someone's experiencing suffering, for example, we can experience that suffering and identify with it. More and more now, people are living life through a screen, through, there's widespread use of pornography. Child abuse imagery is going through the roof, which means that, and violence, all these things that are now prevalent through screens, basically. The impact of that is that people are, if you're able to watch any of those images, you already need to start asking questions about your empathy because it's already distorted. Because those images represent people really experiencing pain. And also we think about the images about, ISIS beheadings and how they're shared frequently on the media. And so, yes, the more that we interact with each other through machines, the more we lose our empathy.
What do you think?
I would make the comment that there is a difference between cognitive empathy and emotive empathy. A cognitive empathy is understanding someone's situation. Emotive empathy is feeling it alongside them vicariously, and they are two subtly but importantly different topics. I do think that technology is creating a more transparent world. We are now more clearly able to understand what is going on around us in a global scale and outside of our immediate social network. And I actually think that, when we see outrage over things like Cecil the lion, we could not have imagined that a generation ago or even 5 or 10 years ago. And yet today people are able to unite in feeling the same outrage of empathy about incidents like that.
That's a great example. And this is where I find this topic is fascinating, but I find it hard to to really come down on one side or the other about whether or not we're losing empathy, because what you brought into this, Nell, is a sense of history. And what we haven't done is really benchmarked humanity. So are we losing? Who is losing? What does that look like? How can we tell? And indeed, the very idea of benchmarking humanity, which may start to become possible, for me, it's also a very disturbing idea, because then how do we approach people who are at one end or another of the spectrum of what we consider to be acceptable humanity? And do we start to then medicate or control this in other fashions?
I'd also think what's making us kind of lose that empathy is this sort of media barrage that makes us numb to what's going on, because how many times can we really go look at, an ISIS beheading and still feel empathy? One of the things that's happening with this kind of new wave of virtual reality that's going on, and it's actually being called an empathy machine, which I find fascinating. And that was sort of started by a woman named Noni de la Peña, who was a journalist and wanted to bring you into these journalistic situations, such as a bombing in Syria and the refugee camps, in a way that made you a witness to so you're in a virtual reality thing, in the full 3D thing with the bomb going off and children running, or then you're in the camp. And there's an interesting thing that happens when you are immersed and present at that situation. One is, it's so much more real than the barrage of media we get. And the second thing is, you're a witness, but you can't really change anything. And that sense of not being able to change anything actually enhances your empathy, because you feel powerless, and it just changes the whole equation.
You're so well known for your work in virtual reality. Do you think that this is going to be an outcome if we see virtual reality kind of hit mainstream, if we see more and more folks use it? Is it something, I'm at CNN, we would incorporate into our reporting, something that you think will really create a change in the way people view the world?
I hope so. I think it's one of the positive uses for virtual reality. We'll have lots of not so positive uses, such as virtual porn and things like that, and that scares me. But I think if we can put it out there as something that is a positive influence on the new generations, then we might have a chance.
Can I just bring in a different issue, which I think we haven't really addressed? People don't seem to be like to be in the presence of other people very often nowadays, it seems. So last night I was actually at a party, and all the groups of tables, most people were focused on a screen. So they're actually in the presence of other people, but their attention was focused on images within a screen. And so we need, and even with then, friends communicate with each other via these virtual systems. People spend 6 hours online per day. That's probably a lot higher now. So the question is, why don't we actually like being in the presence of each other? Why are we turning to these digital social networks? And I think that's the real question. Is there something unpleasant that we're experiencing with each other that we need to address?
If we're all more connected than ever, so how do you convince people in this connected world, right? How do you convince people to put their head up? You've got these devices in front of you at all times. Everyone has social networks at all times. I mean, the pendulum is definitely swinging one way. How do you get it to swing back?
Well, you can join my campaign. I launched a campaign against sex robots. But I don't think people are actually more connected today. I think they're more disconnected. Because you might use a digital device to link you with another person, but actually you're in the physical moment, you're actually interacting with a machine. And that's what people are forgetting. So,
what do you think?
I think that technology can be an aid to mediating between people and to having a conducive conversation. I see technologies like, I think the company's called Crystallize, and it's able to analyze semantically the blog posts and tweets and writings of a person in order to understand the kind of cognitive, communicative styles that they respect. If you're writing a letter to Bob, Bob wants something to be very short and precise, and other people like something that's more polite. And these technologies can tell you, this letter that you've written, it's too long, they're probably not going to read it, or this thing that you've written will annoy them. And so I think that machines can be a way of helping us to communicate and avoiding some of the faux pas and miscommunications that do happen between people.
What are the ethical conversations we need to start having? Because it oftentimes feels like we have these technologies that move at lightning speed, and then we ask the questions. Well, what's happening now? Do we need to react a certain way? How do we actually program the ethical conversation into innovation? I know you've worked a lot with this.
As managing director of Silicon Valley Robotics, that's an industry group, and the focus is on supporting innovation and commercialization of technologies. My background was in human-robot interaction and the spread of technology into society. What I realized is that, on the whole, I was too late to have any impact. Once you're a consumer, you are comparatively powerless, barring one important thing. I wanted to have a position that was far more strategically engaged at the time when decisions were being made about what was built and how it was built and why it was being built. And I think that transition point from research out into commercialization into the real world is the most pivotal point. It's where you have the most chance to change things, but I realized things are driven by money, commercialization. So this gets a little bit scary because I don't see people paying money to purchase empathy, but I see them paying money to purchase a lot of more problematic things. If I look at game purchases, we've seen this all the way through with educative books and materials and videos. There is what you want your child to watch, and then there's what your child actually watches. And I think we've got a disconnect there, and I'm not certain how we'd solve that.
What's at stake if we don't? You talk about doing this before these kind of robots go to market, get commercialized. What's the worst case scenario?
The worst case scenario is the don't know scenario, because there are some things where we can, some examples. I get very interested in things like the gendering of technology, and we can look back at some cases where, say, seatbelt design was entirely tested on male crash test dummies. So seatbelts were never designed around the female figure or the female height. And indeed, it's beyond gender, because this had big implications for people who were non-white males. If you were Vietnamese or Italian, your body shape was remarkably different to the shape that seatbelts were tested on. And this became regulated. You had to do these crash tests to be able to sell your car. And those are cars that are dangerous for people with small body frames. So I try and see where are the areas where this might be happening with robotics. But we hit a point where we don't know what we don't know often until after it has come out and become a problem.
The idea, if you look at the description of this panel, it's about, can empathy be programmed? So how do you program empathy?
I suppose empathy is really a model of how something else is going to respond to certain actions or certain communications. Now, a lot of empathy we have intuitively within ourselves, you know, the mirror neurons in our mind. Machines instead have to create models about how people typically respond, you know, to threats or insults or platitudes and things like that. I think that we are going to require computational ethics. That's something I'm particularly interested in researching. And rather than teaching robots what is permissible and what is not, or like what is right and what is wrong, because those are incredibly difficult questions, our society has people with very different values, very different opinions, different ethical rule sets. But surprisingly, despite all of that diversity, we managed to have a civilization that generally gets on pretty well. And there was a famous psychologist, Lawrence Kohlberg, who specified that there are basically 6 different levels of moral reasoning. And it's not what is right or what is wrong, but how people come to that decision, whether it's simply because something is against the law that it's bad, or whether it's against a social contract, towards more sort of universal ethics of let's treat everyone with the same rule set. So I think that rather than specifying what is right or what is wrong, saying that here's a bounding box whereby we can all more or less agree is safe territory to operate. And I think that's probably one of the best places to start from.
You know, I'd never thought about the gender thing, where we haven't really programmed in a gender equality into kind of the technology that we have today. It is very dominated by the people who sort of did the programming. And we're at that cusp for empathy, too, and ethics in the kinds of things we're building with AI agents, with all of this. What comes to mind is the programming of these autonomous cars, and what's going to have to happen when the car has to make a choice of veering this way and killing 2 people as opposed to veering that way and killing 10 people. And these are ethical decisions that we have not embedded into the code, where these things that are going to be part and parcel of our lives for the next 100 years and beyond. We've really got to start thinking about that.
So who thinks about that? I was looking at that example, and I was just thinking, this is unbelievable. The promise of self-driving cars. We're having the conversation about, you know, people being put out of work, but we're not having the conversation of why the car chooses to kill 1 person or maybe kill 3 people, and who makes that decision.
Yes, a lot of philosophers raise these questions. There is like a culture of trying to think about robot rights and responsibilities that robots can have. Yet we live in a human society where we do not treat in our world today, there are dictatorships, there is suffering, there is a sex trade, there is racism, there is discrimination, and we live in a world where We haven't even achieved that for each other, and people are thinking about extending this to machines. So what they're actually going to extend is already a distorted version of the human. So I think to make good technology, we're implicated, our subjectivity as humans is implicated in all the technology, our gender, our class, our race. And if that's implicated, then we need to be conscious of that. And that's what, it's great that you're in your lab. I think they should be very glad to have you. So someone thinks about these things because they are part of it. And I'll give you a good example. Let's not forget Facebook developed as a tool to rank women in terms of their attractiveness. And how do people use Facebook today? They use it as a way to display what they own, what they have. And it's still a competitive network because the idea behind it is always still implicated in the machine.
You guys all work in such fascinating fields. We have robotics, virtual reality, futurists. You do so much research on relationships, sex robots. When you're laying awake at night worried about something, the risk of technology and what it could do if we don't get our shit together, right? What do you worry about?
For me, I'm less worried about amoral robots than the potential effects of supermoral robots. So, for example, as you correctly mentioned, our society has so much violence in it, right? Violence between people, violence towards animals and children, and a lot of it is just accepted as normal. Machines do not have the same biases, typically, that humans do. And so a machine may be able to look at the world in a more objective way. And just as we can have super intelligent machines, we may have super moral ones. But what happens if we have a terribly empathy-filled machine that is able to look at all of these sociopaths, as it would perceive most humans to be? We cannot predict the decisions that such an entity will make. And we have ways of dealing with amoral machines or amoral entities in our society. We put people in prison. But we've no way of dealing with a robo-Buddha. That's going to be a very interesting scenario.
Interesting. What do you think? What keeps you up?
I think supermoral machines are the least of our worries. When I start, this is what frightens me, right? What people are imagining for sex robots is that not only will people be able to have sex with machines, but you'll be able to have sex with child machines, animal machines, octopus-shaped, hydra-headed machines. But the worrying thing, this is what's terrifying, is that means that's already happening now. It means that that kind of level of depersonalization already exists amongst people. Because I think we are a bit different, because I think technology just reflects what is actually already happening. And I went to an event recently, 73% of child abuse imagery on the internet is torture. So we're talking about serious problems that exist now in the real world, and what's happening is people are now projecting that into machines, and I think that's what keeps me awake at night. That and the end of humanity if we don't start being nice to each other.
So do you think that there's some sort of justification that it's okay to be mean to machines?
No, it doesn't work like that. You see, as we live as humans, right, we gather most of our information and our experience of the world through our human relationships. So then when it comes to relating to nature or animals or machines, we just take our lived relations with each other into those domains. So if cruelty exists, so talk about video violence. Video game violence exists not because it doesn't create violence, it exists because we live in a violent society. And that is our consciousness that's downloaded, if you like, into machines. So we can't just, say we're just going to talk about the technology. We have to also have parallel discussions about what's happening in human society.
Sure. I'm just thinking, though, if I knew this was a dumb machine, I might not be so disinclined to kick it when I was mad, because it's really not going to feel anything. It doesn't have that kind of emotional state that we have as humans. And
No, it doesn't.
as we, some people might have thought animals didn't have feelings, so we could be cruel to animals and, torture them and eat them or whatever it is that we think is wrong to do with them. I just wonder if we think of machines as being emotionless beings that we can kind of regulate to some other domain that isn't human, what happens when we do give them emotions and we do give them feelings and they do start to kind of be more sentient beings?
Yes.
There's just, and I think that's where you're coming from. These machines are going to reflect what is in general in our society, in our culture.
Well, I think what's happening now, and we can tell by the Society Summit programs today, is today there is this idea that there's no difference between a person and a thing, right? We're just, ontologically assembled differently. I actually do believe there's huge differences between being a person and a thing. And I do think there's a huge difference between, I think we share with other living creatures like animals a life force. And it's important that we respect that life force and we respect nature and we build relationships, But if we want to build good relationships with nature and animals, we need to have good relationships with each other first as human beings.
Just, Jackie, to finish off kind of some of the ethical stuff and what kind of keeps you up, I tried out the new demo of Oculus with Palmer, right? And we were playing a game together. It was the
Toy box?
Toy box.
Yeah,
we were playing Toy Box, and it's the first interactive. He's in your head, and it's talking to you and showing you how to pick things up. And then he showed me how to pick up a gun, and he showed me how to shoot the gun. And it was a laser gun, and I'm just shooting it all over the place. I'm like, damn, this is a lot of fun. And then I'm like, oh my God, as someone who has covered every school shooting in the last 3 or 4 years, my first question to him was, will these lines blur? And he answered to me, he said, oh, well, video games, he gave me the kind of the video game argument, but with virtual reality, those lines blur between, is this reality, is it virtual? Do you worry that with virtual reality, we need to come up with some ethics and how we teach and how we learn about these things? I worry that children are going to look at Toy Box and learn how to shoot a gun, and it's going to be almost new level from the video games.
There's some responsibility on the part of the people who are creating content for these things to change the way that video games had one particular purpose, and you could pretty much separate them from your everyday reality life and say it's a game. It's going to be less easy to do that, and it is a responsibility for creators to understand that. Just as you were saying about the gender thing, we've got to have this empathy that's built into this. If we're going to blur the lines between digital and physical, we better be damn sure what we're putting in that digital is beneficial to humanity. I don't know how we do that, but I'm actually surprised there's a gun in that particular environment because there's toys. It's just,
right.
It's a great demonstration. Mm-hmm. But if somebody comes away with that, I've just learned how to shoot a gun, then it's not such a great demonstration. I don't know how you get around this, but there is some responsibility on the part of the creators, and I think every technology lab should have a few philosophers.
Or an anthropologist.
and anthropologists.
And how about you? I mean, we were talking about when you lay awake at night and you worry about the risk if we really don't get it together. What do you worry about?
I agree we should have philosophers, anthropologists, and ethicists deeply engaged as much as possible at the research and commercialization stage, having these discussions. Pragmatically, though, on the positive side, we have legal frameworks that most technologies fit inside of, and it's really sometimes just a case of working out exactly how you go ahead and apply those things. So we're not without frameworks. We've already agreed on many of the basic principles. But as said, we're still perhaps primitive as a civilization. There are improvements that we could be making, and the technology is allowing us to see some of these edge cases perhaps more clearly, and it can give us some opportunities. And I was just thinking, I talked yesterday about the blended reality that we start to have. And I know you, Kathleen, you make a lot of points about how we're losing immediate connection and physical connection. And I'm saying, yes, we mediate our relationships via technology. We use it both as an extension of ourselves, as a proxy for other people, and it's starting to have its own identity as well. But what happens with this all blending together, it's changing our categories of you, me, and it. But on the positive, there are occasions now when the virtual person may also be partially inhabited by a real presence or person. And a physical robot is quite frequently being used or controlled by a person. And you start to hit these interesting cases where who is it talking? Who is it listening? Who is it moving? And we'll run into things where when you bump the robot, the person that is partially engaged with that robot says, hey. And we can start to bring perhaps more real human awareness into situations that have been very technological. And that might be a good thing.
And I know we got to wrap soon, but I can't leave this group of women without kind of talking about technology and relationships. We live in an age where Tinder is taking over, where people are kind of pixels and you swipe through, and where there's so much, people are talking virtual reality. They've been talking this for a while, but the promise of virtual reality and pornography, sex robots. Is technology helping or hurting our relationships? I know it's not that simple, but all of you have such different experiences in it. You know, what part of this? What are your thoughts on it?
I think as human beings, we have needs and wants. And I think there's this idea that come primarily from Silicon Valley that says your needs and wants can be met by a thing, right? And actually, not all our human needs and wants can't be met by a thing. Sometimes our needs and wants have to be met by another person, because only another person is a sentient, conscious human being who can really give us what we need, an emotional connection. So I think we need to be more present with each other. I don't mind people using technology to arrange meetings and stuff and share ideas, but actually when it comes down to it, in our immediate environment with the people we're interacting with, that's really where we need to be focusing our attention again.
You've spoken out against sex robots.
Yes.
It's even weird to say the word sex robot, but maybe it won't be the weird to say sex robot in like 5 years or something. You think that these ultimately, let's say people are using sex robots, what if they do kind of program in empathy? What if they do, are those lines going to blur a little bit? Is there going to be some confusion?
I only think you can experience empathy with another human being. I don't think you can have, it's primarily what you have with other human beings that then you can take into the way you interact with machines, with nature, and with animals. So people are saying, for example, the people promoting sex robots, they're saying, well, these are men who have never had a relationship and can't interact with people, so we give them a machine. So if they're already having difficulty interacting with a person, then giving the machine is just going to reinforce their sense of alienation. It's going to reinforce their disconnection.
Jacki, how will virtual reality, how could it transform relationships?
Well, I wanted to say in this regard that Facebook has made it so that I've never felt closer to my sisters who don't live in the same city as me. And we were never all that close growing up, and then we all went our separate ways. And now every morning I have a little morning thing with my sisters, and I see what they're doing, and I'm feeling really close. And I think as Facebook goes out into the virtual realm, we'll have more ways to connect with each other, and I think it can actually help strengthen some of those relationships, if you will.
And now, going from the ethics standpoint, you're sitting in front of the founder of Hinge, the founder of Tinder. They're not here right now, but they're at this conference. Or I know at least Sean is. I might see him later. Okay, what do I tell him from someone who knows so much about ethics? If you were looking at him, what would you tell him as he is going into, programming this app that is changing relationships and the way we find relationships? What does he need to take into account?
I think a lot of people are concerned about things like trolley problems and all these like super complex ethical situations. I think we got to take it back to the basics. I think if we can teach machines kindergarten ethics, as I call it, like the Don't hit, don't steal, don't ruin other people's stuff. I think that is plenty. If we can just make machines understand the basic stuff, I think that's plenty.
Great. I know we got to wrap. Last question for you, because I just want to make sure you have, if do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we can do is solve the don't know, and we can have diverse founding teams. And that's something that I don't see very often, and I try and support it as much as I can, because I do think that maybe women would create different robots. And we won't know until we have more women building robots.
What robot does a woman want to create? I like that. Just out of curiosity, a woman robot compared to a robot a man would create, what is that? What does it look like?
Well, I do know a lot of women that build robots, and they build a broad spectrum of robots as well. And I think it would certainly be wrong to be looking for a female robot to be coming from a woman robot builder. But I certainly know that, in general, women are very concerned with questions of helping solve problems in the world, assistive robots, technologies that enhance people's life, technologies that really solve problems. So that's one thing that I think we should expect to see.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Great.